halls of Fairhaven Psychiatric Hospital were always too quiet at night. The kind of quiet that made you hear your own breath, your own heartbeat, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. It was a quiet that felt wrong. I had worked the night shift here for over 2 years, but tonight was different. There was a new patient. Her name was Clara. No last name, no records. Just dropped off by the police, who found her wandering near the old bridge, barefoot and mumbling to herself. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair tangled and damp as if she had just crawled out of a swamp. And she never spoke. Since she arrived, she had only done one thing: pointed, straight under her bed. I had seen plenty of strange behaviors here. Patients rocking back and forth, talking to unseen figures, scratching at their own skin. But this was different. She didn't just point, she trembled. Her whole body tensed, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to scream but couldn't. I sighed, glancing at the time. 3:12 a.m., the worst hour. "Clara," I murmured, stepping closer. "What are you pointing at?" She didn't blink, didn't move, just kept her finger locked on the dark space beneath her bed. I exhaled sharply. "There's nothing there. Look." I crouched beside the bed and lifted the corner of the thin, scratchy blanket. Just floorboards, nothing else. When I looked back at her, she finally moved. She shook her head, not in relief, in fear. I tried to shake it off. This place messed with people's heads, even those who weren't locked behind these doors. Still, something about Clara unsettled me. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just sat there rigid, pointing under the bed. And now she was shaking her head, her breath shallow, as if warning me. I forced a chuckle, trying to ground myself. "Clara, listen. There's nothing there, okay?" Her eyes darted to mine, wide and unblinking. Then, for the first time since she arrived, her lips parted. A whisper, a single word. "Help." I froze. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But I hadn't. My skin prickled with unease. I swallowed. "Help with what?" No answer. I turned back to the bed, my stomach tightening. What if I was wrong? What if there was something there? I leaned forward again, closer this time. The darkness beneath the bed was thicker than it should be. The shadows didn't seem to shift with the light. Something moved, a flicker, a shift, too fast to be dust. My breath hitched. Then a hand, cold and clammy, shot out and grabbed my wrist. A hand, cold, clammy, too strong. It locked around my wrist like a steel trap, and for a split second my brain refused to process what was happening. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then my instincts kicked in. I screamed and yanked my arm back with all my strength. The grip was impossibly tight, but as I stumbled backward, it let go. Or maybe it was never there to begin with. I hit the floor, gasping for breath. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. What was that? I scrambled to my feet, staring at the empty space beneath the bed. My skin was on fire, tingling from where I had been touched. I looked at Clara. She was still sitting there, still pointing, still staring at me with those wide, terrified eyes. I staggered away from the bed, my breath shallow. "Clara, what the hell was that?" She didn't answer. She just shook her head again. I couldn't stay in that room, not after what just happened. I needed a second to breathe. Without another word, I rushed out, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the cold wall outside Clara's room, trying to steady my breathing. My skin was still tingling where that thing had touched me. Had I imagined it? A stress-induced hallucination? No. I felt it. My wrist was ice cold. I had to see again. Had to prove to myself that it was just my mind playing tricks. I grabbed the flashlight from the nurse's station and marched back inside. Clara hadn't moved. "Okay," I muttered, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "Let's settle this." I crouched beside the bed again, flashlight clutched tight. One deep breath. I lifted the blanket and shined the light underneath. At first there was nothing. Just floor. Then I saw eyes staring back at me. My eyes. They blinked at the same time I did. My breath hitched, my stomach twisted. There was no mirror under that bed. So why was I looking back at myself? A slow, grotesque smile spread across the reflection's lips. I wasn't smiling. I jerked away from the bed, knocking the flashlight out of my hands. It rolled across the floor, its beam flickering. The thing under the bed whispered my name. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. That thing had whispered my name. I scrambled backward, slamming into the wall. My hands were trembling, my skin ice cold. The flashlight lay on the floor, its beam flickering toward the bed. Clara was still there, still pointing. I forced myself to look back under the bed. Nothing. The eyes were gone. The whisper was gone. But I knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. Clara finally moved. She turned to me, her voice low and hoarse like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "It's not me." Her words sent a fresh wave of ice down my spine. Not her? What did that even mean? I staggered to my feet and ran, straight to the security office. I needed proof. I needed to see what the cameras had captured. I slammed into the chair, rewinding the footage from Clara's room. The video played. Clara, sitting on the bed, me, standing beside her. I crouched, lifted the blanket. Static. The screen glitched out completely. When it returned, I was gone. Only Clara remained, still pointing under the bed. My stomach dropped. Where the hell was I? Then, in the bottom corner of the screen, something moved. A shadow. Long, distorted, crawling out from beneath the bed. And it had my face. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. That thing. It looked like me. I stood so fast the chair crashed behind me. My mind raced. If that wasn't me in the footage, then where the hell was I? I ran back to Clara's room, but when I opened the door, she was gone. The bed was empty. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. Just an eerie, suffocating silence. I turned to leave, but something scratched against the floor. Slow, deliberate. I looked down. A piece of paper lay at my feet, yellowed and crumpled. With shaking hands, I bent down and picked it up. 3 words were scrawled in deep, jagged letters. Do not look. The room suddenly felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to turn around. And then I saw it. A reflection, my own, staring back at me from the small window on the door. But I wasn't moving. The reflection's head tilted, its mouth curved into a slow, unnatural smile. I wasn't smiling. I turned to run. But the lights cut out. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole was my own voice, laughing. Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt something was off? I never believed in ghosts, never thought much about superstitions either. But after what happened at the hotel, I can't look at a mirror the same way again. I worked the night shift at a roadside hotel, one of those places people only stop at when they have no other choice. It was quiet most nights. Empty hallways, flickering lights, the occasional guest checking in and out. Nothing ever happened, except in the downstairs bathroom. There was nothing particularly strange about it, just an old sink, a cracked mirror, dim fluorescent lights humming overhead. But every time I walked in, I felt uneasy, like something was lurking just outside my vision. That night, after a long shift, exhaustion made me careless. I walked in, turned on the tap, and glanced at the mirror. My reflection didn't move. I froze. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe the lighting was weird. But then slowly, too slowly, the reflection moved. A second too late. My chest tightened. That wasn't normal. I backed away, watching my reflection closely. It followed, but always slightly behind, as if it wasn't really me. I turned off the tap with shaking hands and rushed out of the bathroom. But as I left, I felt it, a heavy burning gaze pressing against my back. Something inside that mirror was watching me. I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Long shifts could mess with your head. Sleep deprivation played tricks on the mind. That's all it was. But the next night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept glancing toward the bathroom door, half expecting something to step out. I avoided it for as long as I could. But eventually, I had to go back in. My hands were already clammy when I pushed open the door. The mirror was there, waiting. I took a deep breath, stepped in front of it, and my reflection didn't move again. I raised a hand. It didn't copy me. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I smiled nervously just to test. The reflection did nothing. And then, it blinked first. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. The reflection's head tilted, just slightly, not the way a normal person would. The motion was wrong, like a puppet's strings had been pulled too hard. Then, it started to smile. I bolted out of there so fast I nearly tripped. For the rest of the shift, I couldn't stop shaking. That thing in the mirror, it wasn't me. I didn't go back into that bathroom for the rest of my shift. I didn't even walk past it. Every time I got close, my skin crawled like I was being watched. By the time my shift ended, I had convinced myself of one thing. I would not look into that mirror again. The next night I came prepared. I brought a black cloth from the supply room. I didn't know why I thought it would help. Maybe it was the idea that if I couldn't see the mirror, it couldn't see me. I waited until my break, then walked into the bathroom, my heart pounding. The air inside felt heavier, like the walls were pressing in. I didn't look at the mirror. I kept my eyes down as I climbed onto the sink and threw the cloth over the glass. I exhaled, finally feeling like I had control. But as I turned to leave, scratch. The sound of fingernails against glass. I froze. Scratch. A slow, deliberate scraping from behind the cloth. My breath caught in my throat. Then, in a voice so low it barely existed, "Don't hide from me." I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I barely even breathed until I was in my car, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mirror. Or worse, what was behind it. The next morning, I was still exhausted, still on edge, but I had to work. Calling in sick wasn't an option. As soon as I walked into the hotel, the manager, Mr. Wallace, was waiting for me. "Clara," he said, his voice tense. "What happened last night?" I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" He gave me a long, careful look. Then he gestured for me to follow. When I stepped into the downstairs bathroom, I nearly collapsed. The mirror was shattered. The black cloth was on the floor, soaked in something dark, and on the broken glass, written in red smears, were the words, "Don't look at him." I felt a chill deep in my bones. Who did this?" I whispered. Mr. Wallace looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You did." The room spun. No, I went home." He shook his head. "I saw you, Clara. You were standing right here at the end of your shift, just staring at the mirror. Then you smashed it with your bare hands and started writing on the glass. When I called your name, you just walked away." I stared at my hands. They weren't cut. I hadn't bled. So where did the blood come from? And why couldn't I remember any of it? I didn't argue with Mr. Wallace. I didn't try to explain. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Something had taken control of me last night. And whatever it wasn't finished. I spent the entire day in a daze. The words on the mirror burned into my mind. Don't look at him. But who was him? Or worse, what was he? That night I went back to the hotel. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to know. I had to see. The mirror was gone. Wallace had ordered someone to remove it that afternoon. but the shards were still in a trash bin in the supply closet. I stood there staring at them, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then they moved. Not much, just a slight tremor, as if something underneath was shifting. I held my breath, and that's when I saw it. My reflection, not in the way a normal reflection should be. No, it was in the glass shards, broken, distorted, but definitely me. Except, it wasn't moving like me. It was watching me. And then it smiled. The kind of smile that sent ice down my spine. Then the whispers began. You shouldn't have looked. The shards rattled, vibrating against the bin, and before I could move, before I could even think, everything went dark. I woke up to the sound of my name. Clara. I blinked, visions swimming. I was on the bathroom floor. But something was different. The mirror was back, and I was inside it. On the other side of the glass, standing in the bathroom, was me, or at least the thing wearing my face. It stared down at me with empty, cold eyes. Then it smiled and walked away. The hotel got a new night shift worker the next day, a young woman, maybe 22, eager for the job, and I watched, helpless, as she stepped into the downstairs bathroom for the first time. I pounded on the other side of the glass. I screamed, but she never heard me. She just looked into the mirror, and that's when I knew. She had just made the same mistake I did. She had looked at him. Babysitting had always been easy money for me. Parents would go out for the night, I'd watch their kid, eat some snacks, maybe watch a movie and get paid. Simple. That's what I thought when I took the job at the Morrisons' house. They were a well-off couple living in a quiet neighborhood, and their baby Oliver was barely a year old. The moment I stepped into their home, I knew this wasn't just any babysitting gig. Their house was massive, practically a mansion with high ceilings and expensive furniture. Mrs. Morrison gave me a quick tour while Oliver clung to her, sleepy-eyed. He's already fed and should sleep through the night, she said. Just keep an eye on the monitor. It's got night vision, so you'll see everything. I nodded, pretending I wasn't slightly creeped out by the idea of watching a baby sleep through a screen. But the pay was too good to complain. After they left, I checked on Oliver one last time. He was already fast asleep in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. The baby monitor sat on the nightstand, its small screen showing the room in grainy black and white. Satisfied, I grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch in the living room. The house was eerily quiet, but I liked the silence. It felt safe. That feeling wouldn't last long. I woke up to static. At first, I didn't understand where the sound was coming from. Then I saw the baby monitor on the coffee table, its screen flickering. I grabbed it, groggy, trying to shake off the drowsiness. The screen was mostly white noise, but I could faintly make out Oliver's crib. I frowned. The camera had been working fine earlier. I tapped the side, hoping to fix the glitch. For a second, the image cleared, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood next to the crib. My breath caught in my throat. The room was dark, but the night vision made everything visible in shades of gray. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at Oliver. I shot up from the couch, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't possible. I was the only one in the house. I sprinted down the hallway and burst into Oliver's room. Nothing. The crib was right where it had been. Oliver was sleeping soundly, undisturbed. No one else was there. The closet doors were closed, the windows locked. I checked the baby monitor again. The figure was gone. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it had been a glitch. Maybe my half-asleep brain had imagined it. Or maybe I wasn't alone. I stood frozen in the nursery, my fingers gripping the baby monitor like a lifeline. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. A shadow? A glitch? Maybe the camera caught a weird angle of the crib's bars. But deep down, I knew what I saw. A person had been standing there. Taking a shaky breath, I forced myself to leave the room. The baby was fine. The house was locked. I had to be imagining things. Back in the living room, I curled up on the couch and tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. The monitor sat next to me, screen flickering softly in the dark. I shouldn't have looked at it again, but I did. And this time, what I saw nearly made me drop it. The screen showed me, standing in Oliver's room just a moment ago. I recognized the way my shoulders were hunched, how I looked nervously around. But I wasn't alone. There was something behind me, a dark figure standing just inside the doorway. Its face was nothing but a void. No features, no eyes, no mouth. Just emptiness. I gasped, my hands trembling as I whipped my head around to check behind me. Nothing. The room was empty. The house was silent. But my heart was racing, because I knew. I hadn't imagined that. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Think rationally, the baby was safe, the doors were locked, no one was inside. But then, what the hell was I seeing on the monitor? I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call the Morrisons. No signal, not even a single bar. A sharp static noise erupted from the monitor. The screen flickered again, and then it changed. Now, it wasn't showing Oliver's room anymore. It was showing the living room, my living room. And on the screen, standing directly behind the couch where I was sitting, was the figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there, barely visible in the grainy night vision. My body went cold. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. Nothing. But when I looked back at the monitor, the figure was closer. I couldn't move. My fingers dug into the couch as I stared at the baby monitor, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The figure was closer now, almost hovering over me. I felt the weight of something unseen press down on the air around me. My chest tightened. It was like the house itself was suffocating me. Then, the screen glitched. For a split second, I saw something else. The nursery. The crib. Empty. My stomach dropped. Oliver was gone. I shot up from the couch, my body moving before my brain could catch up. My legs nearly gave out as I bolted down the hallway. The nursery door was wide open. I knew I had closed it. I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. The crib was there, but it was wrong. The blankets were folded too neatly, as if Oliver had never been in them at all. Then, the monitor in my hands flickered one last time, and I saw myself, standing in the nursery, right where I was now. The screen showed me gripping the monitor, frozen in fear. But I wasn't alone. There was something standing behind me, and this time, I didn't need to turn around to know it was real. The last thing I heard before the screen went black was a deep, distorted whisper. Not yours to keep. Then, darkness. The city felt dead at this hour. Empty streets, flickering streetlights, the monotonous hum of the bus engine filling the silence. I had driven this route so many times that I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Same route, same stops, the same few passengers getting on and off without a word. The night shift always brought out the strangest people. Exhausted workers, half-asleep drunks, and the occasional loner staring out the window like they were lost in another world. That night was no different. At least that's what I thought. It was nearing the end of my shift. The final stop was coming up, and most of the passengers had already left. Only one remained. A man sitting in the very last row, staring straight ahead. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He hadn't moved in a while. His hands rested on his lap, fingers slightly curled. Something about his stillness unsettled me. I pulled into the final stop and opened the doors. The cold night air rushed in. "End of the line, sir." My voice echoed through the empty bus. No response. I frowned and turned around. "Sir?" Still nothing. With a sigh, I stood up and walked toward him. As I reached out to tap his shoulder, He collapsed. His body slumped to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. I froze. His skin was cold. Too cold. His head lolled to the side, his lifeless eyes staring into nothing. That's when I saw the piece of paper clutched in his hand. I hesitated, then carefully pulled it from his fingers. A single sentence was scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. "Why did you bring me here again?" A chill ran down my spine. I knew this man. Not personally, not by name, but I had seen him before, last week on this very bus. And just like now, he had been the last passenger, sitting in the same seat, wearing the same clothes, holding the same vacant expression. And he had been dead. I remembered calling the police. They had come, confirmed his death, and taken the body away. There had been no struggle, no wounds, no cause of death that I could see. Just a dead man at the end of the line. Yet here he was. Again. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. This isn't possible. My radio crackled to life. "Everything okay, Dave?" It was my supervisor. I pressed the button with shaking fingers. Yeah, I think we have a situation." Static hummed before his voice returned. "Another one?" The blood drained from my face. What do you mean, another one?" Silence, then. "Stay put. I'm sending someone over." The radio clicked off. I turned back to the dead man on the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. Who was he? And why was he back? I stood there staring at the body, my mind racing. The sound of distant sirens snapped me out of my daze. The police were on their way, just like last time. I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. The bus felt smaller, the air heavier. I glanced at the note again. The words seemed to burn into my mind. "Why did you bring me here again?" I had no answer. Red and blue lights flashed through the windshield as a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, the same 2 officers from last week. I felt my stomach twist. They boarded the bus, their expressions unreadable. One of them, Officer Riley, nodded at me. "You again, huh?" I swallowed. Yeah, same guy, same place, same everything. And the second officer, Martinez, crouched next to the body, checking for a pulse. We both knew it was pointless. "No ID, just like last time," he muttered. Riley crossed his arms. "You said you never saw this guy before last week, right?" "That's right." "Then why does he keep showing up on your bus?" The question hit me like a brick. Why indeed? Martinez stood up. "Cause of death is unclear again. We'll take the body, run some tests, but..." He shook his head. "Something doesn't add up." I ran a hand through my hair. "What happens now?" Riley exhaled. "You go home. We handle this. But Dave..." He looked me dead in the eyes. "If this happens again, we're gonna have some serious questions for you." I nodded, but deep down, I knew. I wouldn't have any answers. I couldn't sleep. Even after the cops took the body away, after I gave my statement and went home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. Why was this happening? Was I losing my mind? I spent hours online searching for anything that might explain it, but there was nothing. No news about a missing man, no reports of strange deaths. It was as if the guy had never existed. The next night I went back to work hoping to move past it, but the moment I walked into the depot, one of the older drivers, Frank, pulled me aside. His face was pale. "Hey kid," he muttered. "I heard what happened last night." I nodded. "Yeah, it's been weird." Frank hesitated. "Has anyone told you about the old Route 23? I frowned. "No. What about it?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Years ago, another driver, same route, same stop, kept seeing the same passenger, over and over, just like you." A chill ran through me. "What happened to him?" I asked. Frank's face darkened. One night he just disappeared. His bus was found parked at the last stop, engine running, doors open, but he was gone. My skin crawled. I needed to know more. I needed to find out who this man was. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, a terrible, impossible coincidence. But as I pulled my bus out of the depot that night, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. Would he be there again? The shift went by in a blur. Passengers came and went. I barely heard their voices, barely registered the city lights passing by. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror to the last row of seats, empty, for most of the night at least. Then, as we neared the final stop, I saw him. My grip tightened on the wheel. Same clothes, same posture, same vacant stare. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I forced myself to focus on the road, but my hands were slick with sweat. My foot felt heavy on the pedal. I just wanted this shift to be over. The bus slowed as I pulled into the last stop. The doors hissed open. "End of the line, sir," I called, my voice shaking. He didn't move. I swallowed hard. Not again. The other passengers stepped off, disappearing into the night. I turned back to the man. "Sir, you need to leave the bus." No reaction. I clenched my jaw. I had to do this. I had to prove to myself that this was just something explainable. I stepped down the aisle, the floor creaking beneath me. My hand trembled as I reached out. I touched his shoulder, and just like before, his body collapsed. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what I would find. I already knew. His skin was cold, his limbs limp, his face frozen in that same blank expression. But this time, when I looked down, the paper in his hand was different. Same handwriting, different words. "You still don't remember, do you?" A shiver ran through me. Something flashed in my mind, a memory I didn't recognize. A street, headlights, a sharp turn, the sound of brakes screeching. I staggered back, the bus spinning around me. No. I had never met this man before last week. I had never seen him before. I was sure of it, but the memory was still there, deep in the back of my mind, like a shadow I had been avoiding. I clutched the seat for balance, my head was pounding, my chest felt tight. What was I forgetting? The radio crackled. "Dave? You there?" I fumbled for the receiver. Yeah. "Stay put. We're sending someone over." The same words as last time, the same routine, but this time I wasn't sure I wanted to wait for them. I needed to find out the truth before it was too late. I couldn't stay here. The walls of the bus felt like they were closing in. My breathing was shallow, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I needed to know who he was. Before the police arrived, I searched his pockets. No wallet, no phone, just the crumpled note. "You still don't remember, do you?" A memory flickered again. Headlights, a sharp turn, a man on the street. I staggered back, my pulse pounding in my ears. No, that wasn't real. I was just tired. The radio crackled. "Dave, stay where you are." I didn't. I turned the key and the bus roared to life. I had to retrace my steps. The city blurred past as I sped through the route, watching the streetlights cast eerie shadows on the pavement. There had to be something I was missing. Then I reached the intersection before the final stop, and it hit me like a freight train. A memory, clear as day, 1 week ago. It was raining. The road was slick, I was exhausted, distracted, and then a man stepped onto the street. I saw him too late. I slammed the brakes, but not in time. The impact was deafening. His body rolled onto the pavement. I sat frozen, gripping the wheel, my breath ragged. And then I drove away. The truth knocked the air from my lungs. I had killed him. I had left him on the road, abandoned him in the rain, and now he was coming back. My body felt numb as I stared at the empty road ahead. But was it really empty? I glanced at the rearview mirror, and I saw him, sitting in the last row, staring at me. My breath hitched. My fingers dug into the wheel. "Why did you bring me here again?" His voice was a whisper in my mind. I gripped my chest. My heart was pounding too fast. I felt lightheaded, dizzy. The headlights flickered. The air grew colder. And then I saw my own reflection in the glass. I wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. I was in the back of the bus, sitting next to him, staring straight ahead, frozen. The bus engine rumbled, but I wasn't driving anymore. The world outside faded into darkness, and then the doors hissed shut. End of the line. Working the night shift at a gas station isn't exactly thrilling. Most nights are quiet. Just a few late-night customers grabbing snacks, some truckers stopping for coffee, and the occasional drunk guy trying to buy cigarettes without an ID. I didn't mind it, though. It was easy money, and I could listen to music while stocking shelves. But then I noticed him. It was around 2:45 a.m. when I first saw the man standing in the parking lot. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was waiting for a ride or just taking a break from a long drive, but something about him felt off. He didn't move. He didn't smoke. He didn't fidget. He just stood there, perfectly still, facing the store. I glanced at the security monitors. The parking lot lights cast long shadows, but I could still make out his silhouette. Tall, thin, hands in his pockets. His face was hidden in the dim light, but I could feel his gaze on me. After a few minutes, I looked away, forcing myself to focus on wiping the counter. When I looked back, he was gone. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't hear a car start. I didn't hear footsteps. He just vanished. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. I didn't think about it again, not until the next night. The following night, 2:45 a.m. came around again. And so did he. Same place, same stance, same eerie stillness. I tried not to look at him, but it was impossible to ignore. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing at the glass doors, expecting him to move, to wave, to step forward, to do something. But he never did. By the third night, my unease had turned into something worse, dread. I asked my coworker, Nate, if he had seen the guy outside. He shrugged. "Nah, man, probably some weirdo. Just ignore him." Easy for him to say. He worked the earlier shifts. I was the one stuck alone at night, feeling those invisible eyes on me. On the fourth night, I decided to be brave. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside. The man didn't move. "Hey!" I called out. No reaction. I took a step forward. The lights buzzed overhead. The air felt thicker somehow, like stepping into deep water. And then, he was gone. Not like he walked away. Not like he ran. He just ceased to exist. I froze. My skin prickled. The night was silent except for my own breath. Heart pounding, I rushed back inside. That was the moment I knew this wasn't normal. I couldn't sleep when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing there, staring, vanishing into thin air. By the time my next shift rolled around, I had convinced myself I needed proof. If this was real, if he was real, I had to see it with my own eyes. That night, I kept my eyes glued to the security monitor. My fingers tapped against the counter as the clock approached 2:45 a.m. And then, there he was. Same exact spot. Same stillness. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy black and white feed. My stomach twisted. His face, it wasn't right. The shadows from the streetlights should have revealed at least some features. His nose, his mouth, his eyes. But there was nothing. Just a blurry, featureless void where his face should be. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded in my ears. This time, I didn't go outside. Instead, I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the screen. I needed something to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I looked at the photo in my camera roll, the parking lot was empty. My throat went dry. I looked back at the monitor. He was still there, staring, motionless. I looked at my phone again, the empty parking lot. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just some guy messing with me. This wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was something else. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. I had two choices: run or face it head on. I chose the latter. Pushing open the glass door, I stepped outside. The cold air wrapped around me, sending chills down my spine. The night was deathly silent. The moment my foot touched the pavement, everything felt wrong. The world seemed too still. No rustling leaves, no distant cars, not even the usual hum of the neon sign. I walked toward the figure. My heart hammered. My breaths were shallow. Each step felt heavier than the last. Then just as I reached the spot where he stood, he was gone, vanished, again. The weight in the air lifted. The sounds of the night rushed back all at once. The buzzing streetlights, the rustling wind, the distant hum of a passing car. I turned in circles, searching the lot. There was no trace of him, no footsteps, no movement, nothing. I bolted back inside and slammed the door shut. My hands trembled as I rewound the security footage, dreading what I might see. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was no man in the footage, but there was someone standing outside. Me. I stared at the screen. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't make sense. I was the one standing outside. The timestamp read 2:45 a.m., the same time I had seen the figure every night. But instead of some faceless man, it was me, standing in the exact same spot, staring into the store. I watched, frozen, as the version of me on the screen did nothing. No movement, no blinking, no reaction. Just standing there. But I had no memory of this. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. My hands shook as I rewound the footage further, back to the previous nights. And there I was. Every night. Each time I was the one standing outside, staring in. I covered my mouth with my hand, my mind racing. This had to be some kind of glitch, right? Some kind of error with the camera. But the longer I stared, the more I knew. This was real. And that meant I had been watching myself. I don't remember locking up that night. I don't remember driving home. But I do remember waking up the next evening, my body heavy, my mind foggy. For a brief moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream, a bad nightmare fueled by exhaustion. But when I checked my phone, the security footage was still there, still real. I thought about quitting, about never stepping foot in that gas station again. But some part of me needed to understand what was happening. So I went back. That night, I refused to step outside. I stayed behind the counter, gripping my phone like a lifeline. At 2:45 a.m., I checked the monitor, and there I was, outside again. But this time, the figure did something different. Instead of standing still, it slowly turned its head. Not toward the store, toward the camera, toward me. The screen glitched, static swallowing the image. My phone slipped from my hands, then just as the screen cleared, the figure smiled, and the lights went out. Driving at night has its perks: less traffic, fewer annoying passengers, and a good chance of catching those high-paying rides. But there's something about heavy rain that changes everything. The city feels empty, the streets eerily silent, and the only sound is the rhythmic drumming of raindrops against the windshield. That night, the rain was relentless. Thick sheets of water blurred my vision as I drove aimlessly, waiting for a ride request. I glanced at the app. Nothing. Just the endless patter of rain and the occasional flicker of a streetlight. Then suddenly a request popped up. a pickup in the middle of nowhere. The map showed a pin on a desolate road, far from any houses or businesses. My gut told me to ignore it, but my wallet had other plans. I accepted. 15 minutes later, I arrived at the location. There was no shelter, no sign of life, just a single flickering street lamp illuminating a dark figure standing by the roadside. The rain poured down around him, but he remained still, unmoving, as if he had been waiting for hours. He stepped forward and opened the back door without a word. "Hey man, rough night, huh?" I said, trying to break the silence. He didn't respond. He just nodded slightly, keeping his hood up, his face hidden in the shadows. Something about him unsettled me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way he moved. Too smooth, too quiet. Maybe it was the way he sat perfectly still, barely making a sound. I cleared my throat and started driving. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through the dark countryside. Rain pounded against the windows, and my headlights barely cut through the mist. The GPS estimated a 20-minute drive to the destination, a house deep in the woods, completely isolated. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I stole a glance at the rearview mirror. He sat there motionless, his head slightly tilted down. The hood still concealed most of his face. I tried again. "So, you live out here?" Nothing. The silence was suffocating. It wasn't just that he wasn't talking. It was like he wasn't even there. A few more miles passed. I noticed something odd. No sound of shifting clothes. No movement at all. Most passengers at least adjusted themselves, checked their phones, sighed in boredom. But not him. It felt like I was driving alone. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my pulse quickening. The rain made the road slick, and the winding turns forced me to focus. I needed to get to the destination as soon as possible. Then, something even stranger happened. I glanced at the mirror again, just for a second. But this time, my breath hitched. The seatbelt was still fastened across the empty seat. I blinked, my stomach twisting into knots. I turned my head, my breath shallow. The back seat was empty. The passenger was gone. My heart pounded against my ribs. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, knuckles white. I flicked on the cabin light, hoping, praying, that I had just imagined it. The back seat was completely empty. The seatbelt still lay fastened, as if someone had been sitting there only moments ago. The leather was smooth, untouched, no signs of moisture, no imprint of a body. But that didn't make sense. The rain had been pouring all night. When he got into my car, he should have soaked the seat. He should have left footprints on the floor mats, damp streaks on the door handle. But there was nothing. My breathing turned shallow as I turned my eyes back to the road. The house, the destination, loomed ahead in the distance. It was old, abandoned looking. Its wooden walls faded under the relentless rain. I forced myself to focus. Maybe he had gotten out without me noticing. Maybe I had been so lost in my thoughts that... No, that was impossible. I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded slightly on the slick road, but I didn't care. I needed to check the app, see if the ride had been canceled. Maybe he had ended the trip himself. I grabbed my phone, my hands clammy. There was nothing. No active ride, no record of a trip, no evidence that I had ever picked up a passenger. A wave of nausea hit me. That was when I made the worst decision of the night. I turned the car around and drove back to where I had picked him up. The road felt longer this time. The rain had softened to a whisper, but the tension in my chest only grew. I kept checking the mirror, expecting, dreading, to see him there again. But the back seat remained empty. Minutes passed, and finally, I reached the spot. The same lonely stretch of road, the same flickering street lamp. But now, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A small roadside memorial. Candles, slightly melted from the rain. A bouquet of wilting flowers, and in the center of it all, a framed photograph. I stepped out of the car, my legs weak. The rain soaked through my jacket instantly, but I barely felt it. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at the photo. It was him. The same hooded figure I had picked up. Below the picture, a name was engraved on a plaque along with a date. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. He had died exactly 1 year ago, right here. I staggered back, my pulse roaring in my ears. The memories rushed in, puzzle pieces clicking together too late. No footprints, no wet seat, no record of the ride, because the passenger I had picked up was never really there. A gust of wind howled through the trees, making the candles flicker wildly. And then, I felt it, a presence. The air turned icy. My breath came out in a visible mist. I turned, trembling, and caught a glimpse of something in the car's reflection. A shadow, a figure standing just behind me. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, but the road was empty. Only the sound of raindrops, the distant hum of the street lamp. I forced myself to move, stumbling back into the car, fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. The engine roared to life and I sped away, leaving the memorial behind, my heart hammering like a war drum. But as I drove, I made the mistake of checking the rearview mirror one last time. For the briefest second, I saw him, sitting in the back seat, a small, knowing smile on his face. And then, he was gone. The truth settled deep in my bones. Some passengers never reach their destination. Some are still waiting. And I was the one who took him home.